And welcome everyone to this East West Railway Company online session with your neighbouring parishes and councillors in South Cambridge here and south of Cambridge. My name is Jordi Vescoich and I'm one of the engagement managers here at EWRCO. And we're pleased that you can join us to this second meeting following from the one that we held back in April on the first week of consultation. As advised on the invitation for the session today, like just as a reminder, is an opportunity to kind of like raising outstanding questions that you or your residents might have on our proposals now that you've had a chance to kind of like read into the documents and that residents have been engaging with you as well. And it's really to kind of like ensure that we've tackled your key questions before you submit your responses to the consultation. Ahead of the session, we asked you to let us know if there were any questions or issues that you wanted us to address during the meeting. Thank you to those of you who've written to us, and if you haven't, no problem. There's plenty of time allocated for Q&A. Just to let you know that we're holding similar sessions with all the parishes and councillors within the consultation zone between Oxford and Cambridge throughout the week. And in terms of the structure of today's session, so we're going to start with a presentation that will run for hopefully around 30 minutes, in which we'll basically quickly recap on what it is that we're consulting on in your area, as well as covering some of the key questions that have been coming in not only from yourselves, but also like public webinars, live chats, and correspondence so far that kind of like are relevant to your area. Then we're going to move on to a Q&A for which we have allocated 50 minutes, and then we'll wrap up with like some next steps. So overall, the session should last for around 90 minutes. I'm joined by a wide range of colleagues this afternoon, who they are going to introduce themselves as they start speaking, as well as a couple of colleagues from ACOM and Barley who are supporting this session. Before we start with the presentation, I'm just going to quickly run through some housekeeping. So by now, I mean, most of you will be pretty familiar with the platform that we're using, but just as a reminder, so you'll find in the bar below your screen like different features, such as like to mute and unmute yourself, sharing your camera, opening the chat window, or checking the list of participants. We'd be grateful if you could rename your Zoom username in case it doesn't show your actual name already. We're also going to ask you to please keep yourself muted at all times unless you're given the floor during the Q&A, just to avoid those kind of like unpleasant sort of echoes and noises that sometimes kind of like get through. If you experience any technical issues during the session, please email contact@eastwestrail.co.uk. We're going to be monitoring that mailbox, and we kind of like get you back in. And in terms of the Q&A, so basically, if during the Q&A you want to ask any questions, please indicate so by pressing the raise your hand button, which you can find either within the reactions feature in the bottom right of your screen, or within the participants list on the bottom right as well, depending on which version of Zoom you're using. And last but not least, the session this afternoon is being recorded, and the recording, together with the slides that you're going to see in a second, are going to be uploaded to our consultation site next week. Before we start with the presentation, just quickly to show you who we have invited tonight, so you know who kind of like is joining you to this session. Here you can find the whole list of parishes that have been invited to this session, and if we move on to the next slide, we'll see all the ward councillors from these areas, as well as in the next slide the county councillors. And with that, that's all the housekeeping we had, and now I'm gonna hand it over to Will.
Thanks very much, Jordi. So in terms of the information that we're going to cover today, we'll do a very quick canter through a recap of what we're consulting on. I'm sure that most of you on the call will be aware of that, but we do want to make sure for those who are coming new to this that we cover those things. As Jordi said, we are grateful that people have sent us questions in advance, and also from a series of previous engagement, both with this group, but also more generally, we have a set of sort of regular sort of Q&A that's been coming up, so we'll run through that. A conversation briefly about getting your communities involved. It is good to see that we've got lots of people, responding to the consultation, so that's encouraging. And then we'll provide most of the time at today's session for Q&A, and do just put your hands up, and we can do the Q&A during that session. So in terms of what we're consulting on, moving on to the next slide, as you know, we're in the middle of a non-statutory consultation. This covers a number of things. The first is customer experience and railway operations. We do think it's important that, as well as people comment on the infrastructure that's necessary to enable the service, we get people's feedback on the train service and the experience that they can have on the train service as well. You can see also a list of setting out the infrastructure interventions that are necessary between Oxford and Cambridge. It does cover the full sort of gamut of interventions that we need to make the Oxford-Cambridge service possible. If we flick onto the next slide, just as Geordie shared with you, the parish ward and councillors who we've invited today, this is the consultation zone. So the area shaded in with the blue lines is the area where people have received summary documents through the post. It is our formal consultation zone, and we're obviously doing everything that we can to promote the consultation in this area and beyond. As we move on to the next slide, just wanted to touch very quickly on the customer experience and the railway operations. For us, it's really important, as we look at the next slide, that we're not just focusing on the station or on board the train, but really thinking about the end-to-end experience that people have, all the way from planning their journey to arriving back home. And so really encouraging people to give us that feedback for the kind of experience they want on their railway. And as we move on to the next slide, what our research shows us is that there are sort of a few areas that are particularly relevant. The train service, its frequency, so how many trains an hour, the time of day that service runs, the difference between peak and off-peak, and those sorts of things. Really keen to get your views on that. The station experience, the on-train experience, the experience of interacting with those who work on the railway, and also that all-important customer information as well. So how people get access to live information that allows them to make informed decisions, that is accurate and up to the minute and integrated with all the other information that's available as well. So as we move on, that's the section on customer experience, really encouraging people to participate in that. And it is good to see that actually, as we go through the consultation responses that are coming in, we are seeing those questions on customer experience being answered, because that really does help us as we develop the proposition. Here you can see the full suite of interventions sort of marked out in a geographic area, and our sort of time today will be primarily focused on the route from Camborne into Cambridge, so at the east end of this diagram here. So as we move then into the looking at these in a little bit more detail, section D is the new section of alignment, where there are a number of different route options, route alignment options that we're looking at. So if we move on to the next slide, we have shortlisted 5 route options in this area that we are looking at. Coming out of Bedford from the north, serving either Tempsford or St Neots South, and they're 2 different routes across to the East Coast Main Line. If we're going to Tempsford, it'll be a more southerly route. If we're going to St Neots South, it'll take the more northerly route across Bedfordshire. Then from the East Coast Main Line across to Cambourne. Options for a station is either Cambourne North or Cambourne South. If we're serving Cambourne North, all of the options follow the route of the realigned A428. If we're heading to Cambourne South, there are options that go both diagonally across rather than following the line of the 428 or following the line of the 428 itself. So two different ways into Cambourne South. Before then, both of those routes heading south to enter Cambridge from the south. We have set out in the reports that whilst these are the 5 shortlisted options that we are taking forward, we do have an emerging preference, a set of emerging preferences, which are centred around alignments that serve Cambourne North and that take the corridor of the A428. So that's alignments 1 and alignments 9 as our emerging preferences. So as we move on to the next slide, we then come to the area where the alignments go back to being a common alignment. And you can see the route that we take there in terms of coming sort of south and towards the King's Cross line, the Shepperth Branch Royston line, as it's known, and our proposals there for the way that we do join that King's Cross line. And that will mean we are proposing to slightly realign the King's Cross line a little bit further south and east. You can see the red dotted line versus the blue area that we are, which is where we're developed. We propose our solution, and taking a grade separated approach, which means rather than just joining sort of at a flat level onto the King's Cross line, we do bring one line over so that we can sort of pick up the we can get onto the line without disrupting the flow of the King's Cross line, which is then important for capacity on that line more generally and through to the approach into Cambridge. This does have sort of some implications where we've put a set of options for some of the sort of the road crossings in this or a key road crossing in this area. So as we move on to the next slide, we then look at the sort of the approach into Cambridge. So from Shelford's to Cambridge, a series of interventions there. So as I've mentioned, that level crossing on Hawkston Road, also then a couple of options for how we join the West Anglia Main Line at Shepperth, and then 4 tracking of the West Anglia Main Line from where we join that line up to Cambridge South, recognising highlighted in the mustard colour where the Cambridge South project will be doing some of that 4 tracking itself, and then heading north out of Cambridge South into Cambridge Station itself, and adding additional station platforms at Cambridge Station to ensure there's sufficient capacity there. As we move on to the next slide, probably just worth sort of looking at, noting the fact that we have previously considered the approach to Cambridge from the north, and the fact that we are going with an alignment as an emerging preference for Cambourne North. We did back check the approach to Cambridge from the north, and we have set out in Appendix F of the technical report why we don't think we should revisit the decision to approach Cambridge from the south, looking at the distance and the journey times, looking at the amount of infrastructure you need to build on floodplains, looking at the impact on property acquisition and demolitions, as well as the additional benefits associated with serving the Cambridge South station. So for a set of reasons that, as I say, that we do set out in Appendix F, we've confirmed our preference for approaching Cambridge from the south. As we move on to the next slide, I think we are now heading into, we've covered the bulk of the proposals that are in the consultation documents and the technical report, and therefore we are sort of stepping into the series of questions that you've sent in for us. So if we move first on to questions about the route alignment options, I'll hand over to, I think, Paul to pick these up.
Yes, thanks, Will. So one key question that we've received quite a lot throughout this consultation period has been about local infrastructure, including roads and the rights of way. So specifically here, what is the impact of your planned alignment between a North Cambourne station or a South Cambourne station and Cambridge South on local infrastructure such as roads and rights of way? We understand that roads and rights of way are really, really vital to the communities in the area. And so our policy is that we are not going to be closing roads or public rights of way as much as we possibly can. This also ties into the next question that we're going to go to in a moment, but we are not able to put level crossings in anymore as part of the policy from the Office of Rail and Road, except under exceptional circumstances. So this is the reason why the alignments are vertically where they are at the present moment in time, and I'll come on to that a little bit in the next question. It's because we are keeping roads open and rights of way. Now, in some places, we are going to have to put some diversions in order to maintain that connectivity between communities, but wherever we can, we'll keep the roads and rights of way in their current locations. Will did mention about a couple of level crossings on the King's Cross line. We have further work to do there to understand how we can keep that connectivity between the villages, but we absolutely understand that that is what we must do, and so we will. So if we could go on to the next question, please. So next we're looking at, again, another question that has been asked many times in the consultation. Why are you planning a 10-metre high embankment rather than considering a more sympathetic solution, such as a sunken line that would reduce noise pollution? As I mentioned before, we have a policy of keeping roads and public rights of way open, and we can't use level crossings. We also are at a very early stage of design, and as such, we still need more information on things like geotechnics. And so we made sure that what we were designing at this point was what we call a reasonable worst case. And the reason for that is that a number of projects will make really optimistic assumptions far too early in the schedule of the project. And what that results in is the scenario where project costs and timescales just increase. What we wanted to make sure that we could do with the work to date is not be overly optimistic about what we could do at this point in time until we could gather that further information, until we've got more time to allocate towards fewer options of the design that we have than we have at the present moment in time. We do, as set out in Appendix D of the technical document, have some value management work that has been identified where we will look to see at certain locations where we can put the road over the railway. And this would have an impact of reducing the height of the railway, because we understand that this is an important consideration. But in terms of noise pollution, we will be looking at solutions in terms of noise barriers and also using natural landscaping for visual barriers, so that the railway can be more in keeping with the area which it's going through. But I would like to highlight we are at an early stage of design, and we are looking at opportunities where we can bring the railway down and look to see where we can put road over the top. So I shall now be handing over back to Will. Yeah.
In terms of what will the local benefits be, and moving on to the sort of specific question that we've had come in, what benefits would EWRco bring to local communities between Comberton and the Shelfords? So look, I recognise that there are some places that are closer to stations and the connectivity that East West Rail brings, and there are some communities that are not as close, and therefore, but where we will still be constructing the line. And it is undoubtedly the case that for some communities there will be fewer benefits of East West Rail sort of specifically, but there are benefits for East West Rail in terms of the growth and prosperity that they bring to the whole area, in terms of creating jobs, in terms of helping businesses to grow. So all of those sorts of things do benefit the whole area. Also, by more people using the train, it does take traffic off the roads. So roads that are currently busy with people travelling from places like Camborne into Cambridge, this railway can reduce that pressure on those roads. And also, we are doing quite a lot of work to think about how we can look at options, whether that's cycle paths, whether that's what we do for pedestrian access as well, to see how we can encourage and support active travel for those who are a little bit further away from stations, but where EWRco can bring those benefits too. So whilst, as I say, I do recognise for these communities, the benefits are less obvious. I completely understand that, and there is disruption without the immediate benefits being as obvious. But I do think we want to work very hard to ensure that everyone in the area does see benefit from East West Rail, whether that's through reduced congestion, whether that's through greater economic prosperity, and as I say, anything that we can do that benefits local communities, then I'm very keen to sort of work with local communities to do that and to make that possible. So if we move on to the next slide. So in terms of the plans for freight, so as we move on, please explain the nature and the extent of freight traffic anticipated on the railway, and how would you propose to address the considerable adverse impacts that this is likely to have for proximate South Cambridgeshire communities. So I think, as we've said before, we are doing the work on what the likely freight demand is. We're also doing the work to understand the impact of the constraints that exist, both off and getting onto and off the infrastructure that East West Rail provide, because that does also impact upon the level of freight traffic. And I think we've said in the technical report that we envisage, that there could be paths at about 1 freight train per hour during our hours of operation. And so, we've set out as much information as we can at this stage. We will be setting out further information as we move to the statutory consultation. And it is really important that we do get that complete picture, and that is why we are doing that work. We have set out a fact sheet on this, and we can make sure people who haven't seen that get access to it. Also, the work that we will continue to do in the months ahead as we develop our designs will look at the things we can do to mitigate impacts from the railway, whether that is noise or vibration or those sorts of things, with noise barriers, with things like planting and those sort of things, and also the technology that we use on the railway in terms of track and those sorts of things. So we are actively looking at things that do reduce the adverse impacts and mitigate those as far as we can. So that, I think, that concludes the sort of the immediate answer to that question. I can see from the chat that there will be more discussion on this later on, and that's to be welcomed. And then as we move on to the next question, I'll hand over to Michael, who will pick this up.
Hi, evening everyone. I'm Michael Shanks, Head of Environment East West Rail, and wanted to pick up on some of the key issues and themes that are coming through from an environmental perspective. If we go on to the next slide. So 3 key questions which have been obviously coming through to us that I wanted to try and address the starting point. The first is, how would you mitigate the visual, noise pollution and other serious adverse impacts of local communities in light of your published plans for massive embankments and viaducts across much of the area? So with all of our proposals, environment is very much at the heart of what we're thinking about. It's fundamental to our decision making. That includes looking at potential impacts, but also possible mitigation. And that includes potential noise and visual impact. And so clearly we'll undertake noise and visual impact assessments. They'll form part of an environmental impact assessment process. And the preliminary findings of those will be reported in the next consultation in the form of a preliminary environmental information report, with the full EIA would be then reported in an environmental statement that will be submitted with the DCO application. And in line with government policy, we aim to avoid or minimise negative impacts on health and quality of life for local residents and communities along the line of our route. And in order to help that and support that, we are committed to considering measures that will help to reduce noise and vibration. And there are a number of things we can do in relation to that. Choice of trains is important. Some trains are noisier than others, and so we'll need to think carefully about the pros and cons of using particular types of train. Track technology is another important area. The way we design and construct tracks can have an impact on noise and vibration. So it is an area that, as I say, we'll give proper consideration to. And of course, we'll consider other mitigations as well. So noise barriers, for example, is one of a number of different types of mitigations that might be appropriate where tracks are likely to create noise and vibration impacts. Also in terms of landscape, we are carefully considering how what we build can be designed to blend in with the local environment. And there are a number of ways we can look to do this. For example, by utilising landscape earthworks, which help to soften the appearance of embankments and integrate it into the wider landscape, or by using sensitive placement of appropriate planting, either screening views from sensitive receptors or to soften the appearance and presence of some of those engineering earthworks. In addition, I think it's also important to note actually that the landscape mitigation measures are being closely integrated with our ecological requirements, so that we can try and ensure that we deliver a positive environmental legacy from the scheme itself, for example, in terms of biodiversity net gain. Moving on to the second question, if EWR is prioritising the environment, why is diesel even a possibility? Where is the guarantee for electrification? So thank you for this question. It is a really crucial, important question. And although no commitment has yet been given by government to electrify the railway between Oxford and Cambridge, we will need to ensure that railway aligns with relevant policy and complies with relevant legislation as it relates to net zero carbon efforts. I think it's also worth noting that in 2018, the government challenged the rail industry to produce a vision for the removal of all diesel-only trains from the network by 2040. And we are absolutely committed to running the sustainable railway in the long term. And in doing so, have reduced emissions, including those of carbon, nitrous oxides, and particulates. So to that end, we are exploring how we introduce new and emerging technologies in our long-term fleet. And as we go out to market, we'll be seeking input from bidders across the market to ensure they understand what our environmental goals are and how they can support us in those. And we'll provide more information on that during our statutory consultation, which will be the next consultation we have during winter 21 or moving into 2022. The next question relates to mitigations that we think were adequate to protect the legally protected Barbastow bat colony population in Wimpole Woods, special area conservation. Again, an important question, and one which actually has had a lot of interest. It is a key theme that we've picked up in relation to the Barbastow bat colony in the Wimpole Woods special area of conservation. We have published a specific fact sheet on this on our website, which does provide some more information on it. So I'd encourage you to take a look at that. The potential route alignment that we've identified do not directly affect the woodlands in which the Barbastow bats are currently known to roost. But where they are foraging or commuting, we have been undertaking extensive surveys to provide a detailed picture of behaviour of the bat populations living near or indeed alongside the route. And we have done that in consultation with Natural England to make sure that they're comfortable with the approach that we're taking. Based on the results of those surveys, our design would look to include measures that have been successful elsewhere. That includes things such as creating large and unlit culverts, underpasses or green bridges to allow the bats to pass safely from one side of the new railway line to the other. So I hope that's in part helped to answer that question, but clearly I can pick up further questions later on in the session. And on that, I think I'll hand over to, I think it's Kirsty on property related matters.
That's right. Thank you, Michael. If we can move on to the next slide, and I think just move on to the one on there was a recap. So just quickly to cover on the property side. I'm Kirsty Young. I'm the lead in East West Rail on the land and property team. At this stage in the consultation, we've been writing to all those landowners whose land may be potentially affected directly by our proposals, if we potentially require our sort of land. And we've been holding a series of remote meetings with those landowners through our dedicated land team, who have now joined us on sort of long-term ardent our specialist property advisors, and they're working with us from now through the duration of the project to try and keep that continuity going as well with the local landowners. There were some very specific questions that come in, which is probably, if you can see here, I'll read the question, and then how much compensation do you plan to give all homeowners in the Haslingfield and Harleton area? The value of our property has already decreased due to your proposals and is likely to fall significantly if you proceed with this project. So I'd say that the focus of this question really is primarily on those that are adjacent landowners, rather than those that have necessarily been identified where land is required currently for our proposals. We do recognise, obviously, with the proximity of the railway proposals to the villages of Haslingfield and Harleton, that is a great concern to people within that area and to homeowners within that area. And as we've been saying earlier on, really the early stage in our design means that we're not able to set out the sort of the mitigation plans that could potentially help that situation for those homeowners. We have recognised that position, and one of the things that we're doing at the moment is we're consulting on a proposed need to sell scheme. which is something that would really look at when you go further down development consent order process, you have something called statutory blight, which is actually really only focused on those properties that are required from the scheme, and it comes in much later on down the line when a DCO application has been made. So we're consulting at the moment on our proposed discretionary purchase scheme, which really aims to try and sort of help those homeowners that may be in a position between sort of now in the DCO application, where there is, if the uncertainty around about our proposal affects their ability to sell their property at the market value. And they have a pressing need to sell, so there would be hardship involved basically if they're unable to do so. We're consulting on a discretionary purchase scheme to seek to help them. Now we do recognise that the scheme is really addressing very specific circumstances where people may have a pressing need to sell, for example, for a job relocation and others, and that's not the circumstances necessarily that everybody finds themselves in this area. So we do really encourage through the consultation people to respond to the proposed scheme, and to also tell us if there is other help that they would like us to consider, to respond to the consultation and let us know. I will now hand over, I think, to the next slide, which I think is that to Will or Paul?
I think Paul is picking up the first couple of questions, and then I'll come on for the second two.
Yeah. So looking at questions about why we're not looking at an option to go into Cambridge from the north. First question is, why are you so committed to a southern route which runs on a 10-metre high embankment, twice as high as the Great Wall of China, for 17 kilometres and takes freight through the historic centre of Cambridge? A few points to this question. Firstly, whilst we do acknowledge in the current designs that there are sections that are 10 metres high showing, and bearing in mind that's going from existing ground level to top of rail, not to bottom of the soffit of the bridge. It's certainly not 17 kilometres. We have a maximum length of single stretch of embankment of 1.8 kilometres, and each stretch of viaduct doesn't exceed any more than 330 metres in the area. And we have a section of cutting as well, which we'll be looking into further in the value management stage to see what we can do in terms of improving that. And I think another point here as well is that freight already runs through Cambridge Station. Cambridge Station has one hugely beneficial design to it, in that it has a 3-road between platforms 1, 4 and 7. And there are currently 44 paths through Cambridge Station on average per day today. So whilst we appreciate that there is more work to be done in terms of the embankment height, it's certainly not 17 kilometres, and freight already runs through Cambridge. The next question. So why are you saying that the northern approach requires too many embankments and viaducts when the southern approach requires this also? I think the key point here is we're not saying that the southern approach doesn't require embankments and viaducts as well. What we're saying is that the amount of floodplain that is crossed to the north versus the south is significantly more, and therefore the lengths of viaducts that are required to the north are greater, so that we don't have an impact on that flood zone, which is critical. Also, what we're saying is that to the north, it is a combination of embankment and viaduct that is most likely needed, whereas to the south we do have some cutting, and that gives us an advantage of being able to balance some of the cut fill material, reduce the amount of movement on roads to be able to get materials in, and means that we can reduce the capital cost as well. To the north, all materials would need to be brought in, so it adds a little bit more to the cost. So we're not saying that we don't have embankments and viaducts in the current design to the south. but we're just saying that the viaducts would be significantly more, and it would be all embankment to the north without any cutting, and therefore you wouldn't get the cut fill benefit. And for the next two questions, I will hand over to Will.
So we've been asked, why have we not put efforts into exploring more than one northern approach? You're discounting it without even considering it properly. I think it's important to say that we, firstly, yes, we have been clear that we don't think it's the right option, but we have set out in quite significant detail in Appendix F the analysis we've done, which reinforces that conclusion. And there are a good number of reasons why that is the case. But in terms of the number of options around the northern approach, we did in an earlier stage of development consider a range of options on the northern approach. But I think we have settled on an alignment to analyse that both looked the best of those options, but also relatively closely reflects the proposals that have been put forward by those who are making the case for the northern approach. So, I don't think it is that we haven't properly considered the northern approach, but we have reached a conclusion which I recognise people on this call don't share, but that that is the conclusion that we've reached, and people have the opportunity in the consultation to comment on that, to provide us their feedback, and we will take that feedback into account. Moving on to the next question. People making the point that surely the train should go via the new town at Northstowe. This is where the population is growing and ought to have good transport links. A guided busway is not enough. I think the key thing here is that Northstowe was given approval to proceed on the basis that it had good transport links. It has the kind of frequency and journey time into the centre of Cambridge that you would get on the railway, so it sort of duplicates that, and therefore we think there are greater benefits in terms of providing complementary transport into places like Cambridge South, which is I think the largest sort of biomedical campus in Europe, 20,000 jobs being created there. So quite significant growth opportunities, as I say, which are happening in Northstowe. I certainly recognise that, but that are already covered by good public transport links. So I think that brings me to the end of that question. As we move on to the next slide, we've had some questions about our approach to consultation, and if we move on, in terms of how we will analyse feedback from the consultation and rank the concepts, we will, every single piece of feedback we get as part of this consultation will be individually read. And we're absolutely committed to that. So every single piece of feedback that we receive will be read. And then we will make sure all the individual comments will then be organised by theme, so we can consider them on that basis. And we will use them to enhance our application of the 15 assessment factors that we've made clear are the things that guide our decision making and the recommendations that we put to government. And therefore, that feedback will go directly into the way we look at those 15 assessment factors in order to reach a conclusion. In terms of when will we know the outcomes from this consultation, in terms of the outcomes of the consultation, ultimately this continues to be an evolving picture. through to the point at which we submit our DCO application. But our aim is to make sure that we provide a full response to the consultation, and that will include publishing a summary of the consultation responses and the full consultation responses from our prescribed consultees. And the sort of preferred options that come out of the analysis that we do will then feature in the statutory consultation, which will be, that'll be taking place within about a year from now. So we will respond to the consultation, and then we will also take forward our preferred options into that statutory consultation, where people will have the opportunity to provide their feedback again. So it is in that sort of timescale that the outcomes from this consultation will be known. If we move on to the next slide. As I've said before, we've had, it has been really constructive to see lots of members of the community getting involved. We recognise that not everybody is going to agree with every proposal, and different communities in different places will have different views on the same proposals, and we're certainly seeing that as well. But it is important that we do get your feedback on, so that we can take it into account. And a number of areas where people can feedback, participating in the virtual consultation rooms, so they can engage with the documents that are in there, the maps that are in there. Also the live chat events. We've had a series of those live chat events, and we've got, I think, 5 more, I think some taking place this evening, and also further events over the next over the next couple of weeks, where people can ask direct questions to our experts. In terms of a dedicated phone line for those who are not able or don't want to engage online, it is possible for them to make a call and to arrange to speak to members of our project team, to speak to the experts directly. And of course, for those who want to feedback, there is the feedback form, which is online and via other routes, and I'll talk about that in a second. As we move on to the next slide, this just gives you a bit more information about when those live chat sessions are taking place. 5 more of them over the last 2 weeks, over weeks 8 and week 9 of the consultation, through to the 2nd of June. And then moving on to the next slide, just a quick reminder that people can respond online. They can also respond by emailing us to consultation@eastwestrail.co.uk, or there's the opportunity to respond by post to the free post East West Rail address. If people do want a paper copy of the form, if they want to speak to the team, they're very welcome to email us at contact@eastwestrail.co.uk, or indeed to call the number there as well. I think that probably gets us to the end of the sort of the summary questions that summary of the consultation and the summary questions that we've had in advance. But now we wanted to leave plenty of time to open the floor to people's questions and go from there.
Brilliant. Thanks, Will. So we've received a big number of questions on the chat during the presentation. So as I've mentioned, we're going to start with the very first question that was received from Sebastian Kindersley on the northern approaches. Sebastian, I'm not sure if you want to read or raise the question yourself. If not, I'm going to read it on your behalf.
No, that's fine. Thanks, Georgie. I'll ask the question. It's pretty simple. For the last 3 years, the Northern Approach has discussed trenching technology, and the East West Rail consultation talks about viaducts and embankments. And regardless of how many times this is pointed out, you press on with talking about viaducts and embankments. According to the Aarhus Convention, you are obliged, when conducting any kind of public consultation, to be open, transparent, and honest. And by continuing to refer to viaducts and embankments, you are misleading the public, and this will lead you to potential judicial review. Have you any comment on that?
And I suppose like maybe Paul afterwards.
So let me start by picking this up, and then I'll ask Paul to reflect on some reflections on the trenching. So we are still looking at what the appropriate construction strategy is going to be and the appropriate engineering, but at the moment our analysis suggests that the use of embankments, cuttings, viaducts, is the approach that it is best to take, and that there are challenges with the trenching approach that is being proposed. Now, we have seen the representations that are being made, and for sure, as they're submitted to the consultation, we can take those things into account. But we haven't seen anything that has yet got us to the place where trenching is our preferred method. But as I say, and I don't think that is just it's not that you can trench the north and you can't trench the south. So it's not quite that distinction. But as I say, we have heard the representations. It is something we can take into account. But I will just hand over to Paul, who may well have just a little bit more detail on our sort of views on what we've seen to date.
Yeah, I mean, not too much more at this point in time. I mean, there are lots of considerations to any solution in this area, and I think it's a balance of different assessment factors which give us the solution. It's not to say that trenches can't work. It's all about assessing the trench versus other systems that can be used, and particularly thinking about what the current Environment Agency's current position is in terms of floodplains and not making the floodplain worse, but also capital costs and maintenance costs, and the maintenance required for trenching technology. Now, there is some work that we can do to this, as Will has said, in terms of response to the consultation, but at present, the solutions that we have, we think, are more cost effective.
You cannot keep talking about the northern approach, including viaducts and embankments, when the northern approach doesn't have any. If you have assessed the trenching technology, tell us, show us, evidence that. But until you do, you are leaving yourselves open to judicial review for having conducted a misleading public consultation. It's as simple as that, Will. You've been at this for 3 years, so have I. There's nothing to hide about this. It's all very straightforward.
Sebastian, I don't quite agree with you on that, but we've heard the representations. We will take them into account, but I simply don't think it is right to say that the only way of delivering the northern approach is in a trench, and so therefore that it is fair, right, or reasonable to compare an embankment viaducted south with a trenched north. That is not a fair comparison either. And I think it is important that we do the analysis and we take into account the information that that people submit as part of the consultation. We certainly will do that. But I think it is wrong to say that an illusion that the northern approach has no impact compared to the southern approach. I just don't think that's true.
Can I ask one question? So I think, Will, you mentioned a few times you already have a preferred option. So how serious is EWR about taking the feedback that's coming from the consultation? Or is it more of just a tick box exercise?
No, I genuinely don't think it is. We do look at what the feedback that we get in terms of consultation. We do take that into account. We have when we heard loud and clear a series of representations as part of the previous consultation that we took into account. We've heard feedback as well from others around Camborne, that there were representations to have a look at an option north of Camborne. We heard those representations. We also took into account, as we were required to do the realignment of the A428. And if we need to change our proposals, then we do. So I think we have shown ourselves willing to take on board feedback and adjust our proposals accordingly. So genuinely, I am interested in the feedback that we get.
Again, thanks. So just to kind of like make sure that we've covered this topic, are there any other questions around like the northern approach that like people would like to raise? If not, we might then move on to another of the issues that have been raised. I can see Andy Martin.
Yeah, I've got I'm a relatively simple person. You've got 4 tracks going into Cambridge North, but you only have 2 tracks through Harston. I don't understand why you need 4 tracks to get into Cambridge North and only 2 tracks to go through Harston to the Shepworth Junction. Defies logic to me. Can you explain?
So let me pick up, and then I'll briefly hand over to Paul. There are a number of things that drive the amount of capacity that you need. Part of that is the number of trains that use the line. Part of it is the way those trains are timetabled, what we know as sort of white space. So the amount of available capacity there is at particular times to be able to thread a train through the current usage of the line. But I think the key thing is that we recognise that both north and south of Cambridge, you are likely to require 4 tracking, because the West Anglia main line is a busy line. The availability of the white space doesn't look like it does on the King's Cross line. So our proposals have a twin track railway on the King's Cross line onto a 4-track railway on the West Anglia main line, because we recognise that there isn't the capacity that we need on the West Anglia main line in the way that there is on the King's Cross line. And it's our conclusion, based upon the analysis that we've done, that the challenges around capacity in the south of Cambridge, and in the north, both require 4 tracking. That is what our analysis has told us. Paul, I don't know whether there's anything you want to add.
Yeah, sure. We didn't decide what the infrastructure requirements were going to be on each of those lines until we had carried out thorough operational analysis of the existing services serving those lines, and then aligned that with the timetable that we want to be achieving as East West Rail, that we're required to achieve, which is every 15 minutes, 4 trains an hour. Now, what's important is understanding not just the quantity of trains, but where that white space is, but also how those trains are going through. So our operational analysis has shown that on the West Anglia main line, without doubt, either end, we will have to 4-track. The reason why we can get the services onto the King's Cross line as a twin-track railway are partly because of the grade separated junction that we can put on to join the line. So it means that we're not clogging up the down line as we go and cross. So that's the whole purpose of a grade separated junction. But it's also the way that the GTR services are timetabled and flighted. So it was absolutely crucial, and it was information that we received from Network Rail and their operational analysis team, that joining the King's Cross line, we must join after the last station. And then we would have the opportunity to be able to join the line. Our operational analysis has shown that not only can we join the King's Cross line in that manner, but we've also got spare capacity for any proposed upgrades going forward, or the ones we know are aspirational, and we've done those tests. That is that has all been done by operational experts that we've used. And it's important because the operational experts came from the same team as we've got the engineers from. Engineers are not good at operational analysis, absolutely. And you've got to use the proper information using the proper tools in order to come up with the answer. And that is exactly what we've done.
I think it would help if you were able to share that data, because then people could understand the logic behind 4 tracking in the north and only going 2 tracks in the south.
Well, I mean, again, Andy, I know what you're saying, and yes, we can look to get that information across in the future. It's not it's not 4 tracking in the north and twin tracking to the south. The WAML is 4 tracked. It's the King's Cross branch that we can get and maintain as a twin track railway. And it's important to differentiate between those 2 sections.
Yes, so you're going to have a bottleneck in Harston because you've got 2.
No, not at all.
Well, you
No,
just said it's 4 tracking both. So
no, 4 tracking West Anglia Main Line on both, and then we can maintain a twin track railway on the King's Cross line.
So it would help if you could share that information, because the King's Cross line is an extremely busy line.
Yes, it's 6 trains now.
So it's difficult for us to understand why you only need 2 tracks in the south and 4 tracks in the north. If you only need 2 tracks in the north, then it would save you a lot of problems getting into the north of Cambridge.
Same with the south. Totally appreciate anywhere where we don't need to modify and add existing tracks to existing infrastructure is always simpler. However, the operational analysis is showing that's not possible. What's critical from the north aspect is where the white space sits and being able to fit in the timetable for our 15-minute service. And it's got to be understood and looked at not from just a Cambridge position. We're running trains from Oxford to Cambridge, and you've got existing timetables that run on both of those. Plus, we've got other interfaces across other sections of the line. We need to be able to tie in those white spaces to be able to run our 15-minute service. It's not that easy.
So you're limiting yourself to a 15-minute service?
It's a regular service, 4 trains an hour every 15 minutes.
Yeah, and that's it. You won't be able to go higher than that.
No, there is a possibility to be able to go higher. And that's what our operational analysis has demonstrated.
Brilliant. Thanks, Paul.
Paul, could I ask something? You've said in the Appendix F that there will be a conflict between trains towards Ely from Cambridge and east-west rail trains into Cambridge at Milton. That wouldn't be the case, would it, if there were a grade separated junction there? Because that's the whole purpose of a grade separated junction, to avoid such a conflict. And you've said in the document, sorry, go on.
You have to look at both lines. So the whole point of a grade separated junction is you're trying to minimize the impact on the line that you're not running on. So you're not doubling up, in effect, the number of trains that you're running on that and causing that conflict, because you're basically blocking the block section. Where the white sections are, or the white spaces are on those individual lines, it's not going to make a difference if we put a grade separated junction in. That's why we need the 4 tracking.
But you're going over the top of the Ely bound trains. So with the east-west rail trains going into Cambridge on a grade separated junction. So how can there be a conflict? Yet Appendix F gives that as the main reason for tracking into Cambridge. Well, I just don't understand.
It's not just about that one conflict. It's about the white space. It's about where the availability of the spare time is. So I've seen lots of reports and people saying, oh, you've got 15 minutes or 20 minutes spare out of the hour. It's not about the fact that there's 20 minutes. It's where those 20 minutes are, how they're split up. And it's about both lines. And what we tested was an off-peak service, not a peak service. It failed to operate on an off-peak timetable.
So
Okay,
should we be using the northern approach will remove all this scheduling challenge you'll have, right, with the King's Cross line?
Sorry, could you say that again?
So if you have a northern approach, will that not take care of it itself, because you don't need to then look at connecting to the King's Cross line?
No, what we're saying is whichever approach you take on the WAML, north or south, you need to four-track the WAML, West Anglia main line, which is the north-south line through Cambridge. What we're saying through our operational analysis is that we don't need to four-track the King's Cross line because of the way that the GTR services are flighted.
At what stage will you share the operational analysis?
I think on that one, David, let me go back to the operations team. But provided I don't have a problem with us sharing the analysis. Sort of provided it is sort of complete and comprehensible for people, so it provides a full picture. But I don't have a problem with us doing that. So we will go back to the operational team on that basis.
Brilliant. Thanks, Paul. And we'll mindful of the time. I'm going to then move on to another topic that has been raised quite a lot, which is engineering solutions. And I'm going to pick up the question that Ethan van de Veyer raised around basically, I'm not sure, Ethan, if you're still with us, you want to raise it, or if not, I'll read it for you. But basically, Ethan's question is, can you be clear about the range of engineering solutions that you're considering and that you would like feedback on in the consultation? There would seem to be significant scope to reduce landscape and noise impacts by tunneling and going under roads. As Stephen says, I think that linked to another comment, there's very little information about what options you have considered so far before deciding on the worst case presented. I believe Will and maybe then Paul.
I think it's probably worth, again, this is an area where our design work is sort of progressive. So we work from, what we know based upon the work that we've done, and then can we, as we go progressively deeper into the detail, does that allow us to optimize and enhance the design? So, for example, can we do things that mean we can reduce the height of embankments and those sorts of things, and in particular areas of looking, for example, at Chapel Hill and those sorts of things, what can we do there that allows us to, again, reduce down? So the design process starts with what is the reasonable worst case, and then you progress from there such that we can then and we will set out how those designs develop as we get to statutory consultation and beyond. Because I did see a question in the chat as to whether our reasonable worst case was also the cheapest. Well, I think it's fair to say that actually the reasonable worst case, carries costs that you wouldn't want to carry, because the taller the embankments, the more expensive they are to build, and so therefore, if we can reduce the height of embankments, that reduces cost for us. So we are, we obviously, whether you believe us or not, we are genuinely committed to reducing the visual impact and mitigating the impact as much as we possibly can. But even if you don't believe that is our motivation, in terms of a cost driver, there is a good cost reason for us also to try to reduce the height of the embankments and to mitigate the impact. But I will hand over to Paul in terms of who can probably explain the process in a bit more detail than I have.
There's not really much more to add. I mean, that's exactly right, Will. As we go through the project, what we need to do is be able to make sure that we don't over assume too early. That is a mistake that's made by many, many projects. We need to, and therefore, we will be basing the design on reasonable worst case until we can identify the value management opportunities, and we've got a better idea in terms of survey information and desktop information that exists to be able to then make those improvements. That's exactly what the purpose of value management is, and that we're doing the value management at exactly the right point in the project as well, where we can bring true value and reduce unnecessary costs without removing the necessary. And the reason that we've come out to this consultation so early with these designs is because we wanted to make sure that people could have an influence on the options and the designs going forward. If we got much further on with the design and hadn't come out to consultation, there'd be less that can be talked about. Not to say that there's nothing, but there will be less. This is the key point in the design in which genuine value management can be done.
Brilliant, thanks, Paul. Mindful, Michael, you've raised your hand. Do you want to share your question?
Thanks, Geordie. I've got one kind of specific question and one general question. The specific question is very short, which is why does the preferred line go through several housing developments around Highfields, Caldecott? There's one, there's the Bourne Airfield development, which is supposed to have a large number of homes in it by the time you're building this railway, and also another development on the other side of the main road in Highfields that the current line goes through. And I just don't kind of understand what your thinking is there. The general point, I think my kind of biggest disappointment from this call is that you're kind of slicing and dicing the issues very neatly. But what is really causing, I think, the fear and the anger is the combination of all these points. So it's the fact that it's diesel passenger trains and diesel freight, the fact that it's at height, and the fact that it's on this kind of current route, particularly this alignment from Camborne North, kind of snaking awkwardly in between all these villages, kind of really threading a needle, so that it doesn't go directly through people's houses, but you're passing very, very close to hundreds and hundreds of homes, schools, and and it's the combination of these three things that is really the problem. And I think if you could knock a few of the, if you could get rid of all three, that would be amazing. But even if you could knock out two of them, then suddenly it would become much more bearable. But it's this kind of image that people now have of, and not unreasonably based on what I've heard tonight, of trains, 10 meters in the air, spewing out diesel, by their front door. And it's all very well to split those into separate issues, but it's the combination. It's just completely toxic, frankly.
Thanks, Michael. So we'll
just let me pick that up. So I think the first thing to say is that our ambition is to deliver a net zero carbon railway on what an electrified version of this railway looks like, what a hybrid version of this railway looks like, such that we can get to that net zero carbon ambition. And so I think to say this is going to be a diesel railway is misleading, bluntly. And I know lots of people keep saying, but I do think it is misleading. What we are saying is that a decision on electrification and on the traction power hasn't yet been taken. Saying it is diesel, arguably has as much validity as saying it is electrified. The point is that we are looking at what the options are that are cost effective, that get us to net zero carbon, and that's that no decision has yet been taken. So I recognise that we do need to be clear, but that I don't want people to be left with the impression that this is genuinely a diesel railway, because I don't think that's the case. Turning on to the issue about the height, again, we were transparent in publishing the long section drawings. That isn't something we've tried to hide, but as we've said, that is a reasonable worst case scenario, and we will do everything we can to reduce the height, because for reasons that I have said before, it's not in our interest to build at significant height unless we need to. But again, I think we need to be clear. Some of the things that are being presented, I don't think are accurate in terms of 17 kilometers at 10 meters in height, because I don't think that is what the long section drawings show. And to your point about the the work that we have done to make sure that we do have as little impact as we can in terms of demolishing people's properties and those sorts of things. We've tried to be, we have tried to take a route that does avoid impact on existing settlements as far as we possibly can. Now that is challenging in some areas, but that is what we have tried to do. So on all three, we are working to try to mitigate impact, to get to the right answer on traction. So I think I take your point that people are concerned about those three things, but on all three, I think we're trying to say we are working on those things to mitigate the impacts as much as we can.
I think what I kind of slightly fail to understand then is, why do the consultation at this point? I mean, you're asking us to evaluate the impact of this line. I mean, surely you appreciate that there's a huge difference, to the national environment, to the local environment between diesel and electric. I mean, that probably has more effect on the impact of this railway than anything else. And here we are in the middle of a consultation, and you're saying, oh, well, it might be one, it might be the other, it might be a few years of one and then the other. I mean, it kind of, you're asking questions in the consultation like, does it, where should we site the bike park so that people can, do a net zero journey? And I'm thinking, well, where does it matter where the bike park is if they're getting on a diesel train, at least for 10 years? It just kind of undermines the whole consultation process for me. If, one of the biggest drivers of national impact, local impact is, as you say, undecided. I don't get the strategy behind that.
But I think this, Michael, goes to some choices that we've made, which is we can either consult early as the design is developing so that people can have their say at a point at which the design can be easily influenced, and we can take on board people's feedback. If people want all the answers to the finished level of detail, then you develop and finish one scheme, which is what you then take through your statutory consultation and your DCO. We could do that. That is what we are legally required to do. But we've taken a view that it is better that, as a matter of transparency, as a matter of getting people, giving people the opportunity to shape this design when it can be shaped, that means there is some uncertainty that goes alongside it. There is, we can't avoid that because we're partway through the work, but it does mean people get the opportunity to see how that work is developing and then, comment upon it and allow and help us to mature it. It's that is the choice that we've had to take. We opted on the side of trying to engage with local communities rather than presenting them with a fait accompli.
I mean, I don't think that's totally satisfactory, but I know there's lots of people other people with questions, so I'll pass the floor to others.
I can see, Maria, you've raised your hand. Is it to follow up on one of Michael's points, or is it like in a different topic?
I think it will follow up, and it might just be more of a comment than a question. I fully understand the approach of presenting the worst case design scenario. I understand it from the point of planning, from the point of cost effectiveness, and I think you have made, Will and Paul, between yourselves, you have made a case for that. However, what I want to kind of note here is look at that particular worst case design scenario approach from stakeholder engagement point of view. You are taking us and all the residents we represent here on the journey here, Will, but as you say, but it is a very difficult journey, and it has caused a huge amount of anxiety. And I think I hope a lot of people here on the call and wider can say our collective mental health of several thousand people on this part of the route has actually suffered. And you can, reasonably say that the particular approach of presenting the worst case design with very little detail and allowing the space for this detail to be built up in different ways, which you you know, you say it doesn't reflect your thinking, but actually we don't quite see where your actual thinking is extremely difficult. And I'm not sure if you have anything to say to that, but I just want that noted, that the stakeholder engagement resulted, you know, as a result of your chosen approach, has been a very, you know, a very difficult experience for the residents here.
Look, I recognise that building a new railway and the impacts that will have in some areas, you know, are challenging. I do recognise that. It is why we are trying to make ourselves available to answer questions and, you know, provide information, you know, as much as we can. But as I say, it was a choice of between, you know, as I say, making information available as early as we could and helping people to, you know, as I say, it is a reasonable worst case scenario now, but having people being able to contribute and help us shape that, or waiting till much later in the process, which we didn't think was the right thing to do, because we thought it was better to have that proactive engagement. But that, as I say, that was a decision that we took. But I genuinely don't underestimate the you know, the impact this is having. I do recognise that.
Brilliant, thanks, Will. So on that, we can move on to a couple of questions that there have been on public rights of way and traffic. One specific actually was from you, Maria, which was in terms of taking cars out of the A10. You mentioned that actually it's probably going to increase traffic on A10 through Harston and Hoxton, which are already at capacity, and results in one of the highest levels of pollution in the country.
So it may be this is one for Paul in a bit more detail, but you know, our view is that, you know, there will be displacement from people who currently travel by car to travelling by rail from Camborne and other places to get into Cambridge. Now, in terms of specific traffic impacts in specific places, you know, as we progress through the next round of development, we will do more detailed traffic and transport modelling that will help us to understand those things, because we do need to be able to understand those things and set out the potential impacts and set out our response to those things. So, you know, we will do the analysis, but again, this comes to where in the development of this scheme that we are. It is normally for the next stage of development that you do that detailed sort of traffic modelling. Paul, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add.
So Will, can I ask a question then? You said you're going to do a traffic modelling, but will it be happening before the decision is made or after the decision is made?
So
it's already commencing now, so it will be before.
Okay. But that's important, right?
But it's ongoing. It's ongoing work. I mean, you'll understand that for traffic modelling at the moment, it's been quite a difficult thing to go and start over the last year. So we've now got some guidance from DFT as to how we need to deal with some of that modelling information and the differences that exist. So that modelling work is starting now.
Brilliant. Thank you. Next, so there's still a few issues to cover, but I'm mindful that William, you've had your hand raised for quite a while, despite that, like, technically you're not an elected representative, but mindful that there's kind of connections with a lot of like the people here present. Yeah, would you like to raise a question?
Yes, so I remember talking to Will last autumn, and we talked about the benefit to cost ratio for the central section, and it's quite low at that point. I know we haven't had an update in this consultation, but it was explained to us that the case for this actually depends on wider benefits. And I now understand, I think, that the wider benefits are around employment and housing growth. So an example of that we've seen recently is the proposal to extend the biomedical campus to triple its size into the green belt south of its current site and near the Cambridge South station, which is kind of probably good for employment growth, but appalling for the residents there. So I've seen very little in the current consultation about these wider benefits. So, you know, where would the housing be north of Cambourne or south of Cambourne? What major employment sites would we see growing to the south of Cambridge or to the north of Cambridge? And I know that East West Rail are in a difficult position because I think the mandate you've been given by the Department of Transport is very, very narrow. It's just the transport project. But from a kind of residents' point of view, and actually trying to understand why this is happening, I think it would be more than nice. It would be really helpful to see the complete picture. So, you know, what are the employment benefits or the employment growth that we foresee? What are the housing plans that we foresee? And at the moment, I can just see this being very uncoordinated. So what I'm hearing from East West Rail is, you know, well, we just do the transport. What I'm hearing from the South Cambs District Council is, well, we don't really have much influence on East West Rail. Maybe it's the Ministry of Housing, but they really haven't got very far yet. And, you know, another sort of angle on this is the local transport schemes, which are up in the air because of the change of control on the combined authority. And also we have a change of control at the county council. So the wider benefits seem very uncoordinated, and yet they are essential for the business case for this, which of course we haven't seen. So I'm concerned about not just where the railway is going to go, but where these kind of wider benefits are going to land. And, you know, how can people decide on whether they prefer a station north or south of Cambourne, for example, if they don't know what the housing plan is, or even whether it's MHCLG who are in control of that with a development corporation, or the local authority. So it just, in my head, it's a complete mess. So Will, please help me on that.
Will, you're on mute.
I'll take myself off mute. That would be a start. So the assessment factors that we are applying do include those factors in terms of housing and wider economic development. And we do set out in the technical report, you know, some of the information that we have taken into account and the conclusions that we have drawn. And so I think, you know, we are you know, looking at you know, how East West Rail you know, can act as an enabler, but you know, at the same time, we are the railway project. That is the remit that we have got, and we are developing the railway based upon those 15 assessment factors, as I say, which do include those sort of wider considerations. And we've set some of that analysis out, and as we're continuing to develop our business case, and you know, as we complete our business cases, they will be, you know, available, because people, you know, they will be available. Then we are in a place where you know, people can see how the analysis continues to develop. So I think that is the best answer I can give you.
Okay, understood. But I think I've looked at the material in the consultation. It's incredibly thin, and I think the problem you have is that the bodies that are responsible for this are not engaged yet. So you're going ahead with this consultation before, you know, really MHCLG has said much about development corporations specifically, and also you know, the local authorities haven't really got their act together on local transport or the latest iteration of the local plan. So I think there's a big risk that this railway will be misaligned with the emerging plans in the other areas, and so the wider benefits will be lower than people hope. And if you're worried about the business case for this, then I think that's to me, that would be the #1 problem I would worry about.
I take you. I hear the points that you're making. We are doing our best through the assessment factors to take those things into account. But I hear the point that you make.
Brilliant, thank you. So mindful that we've actually overrun by 4 minutes. I'm gonna pick up one last question from the chat, and then I'll go on to Brian, and I think we will then draw the session to a close so it doesn't get too late for everyone. I missed it back. Stephen Watterson, you're actually on the call. It was on the MRAO. But like, I'm not sure if you want to raise it yourself. If not, I can read it. But basically was, please can you explain what gives you confidence after only very preliminary discussions with the MRAO and the university that you can mitigate any impacts that the railway will cause, particularly given the plans for the railway to be sited on 10-meter high embankments within 1 kilometer of the largest telescope. This is such a major determinant of route choice that it cannot be dealt with in such a cavalier manner.
Yeah, shall I deal with this one?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
We have been in talks with the staff from the University of Cambridge at the MRAO. We understand that there are two main issues that they are concerned with. One is vibration and one is EMI, so electromagnetic interference. We believe that the solution for mitigating electromagnetic interference should be quite simple. Vibration, we need to do a bit more work and work with the University of Cambridge closely to see how we can mitigate that. However, the conversations have been very positive so far, and that's what gives us confidence that we can find a solution to make this work. Again, I think what I would say in terms of the height of the embankment, this goes back to the same point. We are looking at the value management and see if we can reduce the height around those areas, particularly what's driving the height of the alignment of that place is going over the 603. So if we can look to adjust that, then we can bring the alignment down. One solution that we do know is effective for the EMI risk is earthwork embankments. That's something that's been quoted to us from MRAO. It's something they use against the edge of the 603. So there is definitely something that we can be looking at there from that perspective. But we've got more work to do, but conversations have been positive so far.
Stephen, I'm not sure if you want to follow up on that, or then I'll go on to Brian. No, brilliant, thank you. And then Brian.
Thank you. I think I want to just go back to the consultation process itself, because part of the public engagement that Maria was talking about is there's a lack of trust in the consultation process. And I'll take the diesel issue as one example of that. If this was a real consultation process, you would take diesel off the cards, out of the project right now. There's nobody anywhere that thinks diesel on this railway is a good idea. So we could discount it. If the consultation exercise had any power, then that would go. I mean, we've got a changing circumstance from 4 years ago when the DfT instructed Network Rail to remove electrification from the scope of the western section. So right from there, the idea that the East West Rail could be electrified was taken off the cards. So why is it still being considered? How, under legislation changes that we've seen recently for the carbon change legislation, I just don't understand where you're at with diesel and the consultation exercise. Thank you.
Ultimately, Brian, here, this is not a decision for us. It's a decision for government. Through this process, people are making their voice heard. I recognise that. people are not supporting diesel, and as I've said, our intention is to be a net zero carbon railway. It's why we're looking at the electrification options. So we are looking at those things for sure, but ultimately it will be for us to put the options to government and for government to make that decision. And they will do so again with sight of the strength of feeling that's been expressed in this consultation and the analysis that we are doing. But as I say, we are looking at all the options so that we can be a net zero carbon railway.
But you see where I'm coming from in terms of what Michael was saying earlier about those things that have been separated out. If we can't have any influence on one significant one, what chance have we of significantly impacting any of the others, either of the others?
As I say, I don't think it is that government have decided diesel. I think it is that we are so that they can take a decision on what the right traction option is. And no doubt all the feedback that we are getting, in terms of people wanting electrification, that is something that will, that will need to be taken into account.
Brilliant, thank you. Just conscious of the time. Are there any kind of final questions, final points that like people would raise? If not, we will sort of draw the session to a close by quickly running through like the next steps. But I suppose like last call for attendees, if anyone has any more questions. If not, then I suppose Will, if you could take us to a close, and if we could have the slides back, just quickly touch upon what's next.
So the consultation is continuing through to the 9th of June. I think, as we've said, if we flick onto the next slide, we do have a series of those live chat sessions for people to, if they've got specific questions they want answered, our experts will be online to answer those questions as part of those live chat events. Then there is people making their submissions to the consultation, which ends on the 9th of June. I think we've sort of been through with you before. That's reply online, it's reply by email, it is send to free post eastwestrail.co.uk. And as I said to Maria earlier, we do want an ongoing conversation. I do recognise some of these conversations are challenging, and some of the content isn't welcome. I do recognise that, but we genuinely are wanting to take on board people's views. We are consulting at a point where we can, where it is still possible to influence how the railway develops in the future. So do stay in touch with us. Email address there, and also the phone number. And thank you very much for your time today, and I'll look forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks very much indeed.
Brilliant. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.